Today, joining me now, Pete Buttigieg, Biden campaign surrogate and former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, former presidential candidate himself. Great to see you today, sir. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, you saw what we talked about with the vice president with regard to the handling of COVID and when the actual vaccines will be ready. Your thoughts on all of that, on the interview, on what he had to say?
Well, I really hope that happens. Look, a vaccine, a safe, effective vaccine can't come soon enough. The sooner that happens, the better chance we have of being able to get this virus under control and just have our lives back, which I think we're ready to do. Plus, we're never going to get the economy back on track without that vaccine. So it's critically important that it happen. And my hope is that this will be an area free from political interference. Of course, I'm worried about that.
Why are you worried about that?
Well, because of this president's track record of intervening politically in parts of the American government that are supposed to be free of politics, right?
But we've heard from the people working on the vaccines, they all signed a letter that they would never allow any political interference. And, we heard from the president and the vice president that, the last thing they want to do, I would imagine that any leader would want to do is put something out there that's going to be unsafe. There's a process in place for that. And I think that we have seen Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris sort of punch some holes in that theory and create some doubt around that. And that's certainly their right to do so. It's a free country. They can say whatever they want. But it does make some people, I think, concerned and wary who might not go get it, who maybe really should. Does that concern you?
Well, what they're expressing is concern about this president and his track record, and I think that concern is justified. Look, Donald Trump's not great when it comes to keeping a promise that something will be delivered on a certain date. Remember when he told us there'd be a health care plan in 2 weeks? He said that, 6 weeks ago. He also said that years ago.
That's very true.
Happened.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that actually coming up.
Even though I wish it were true, usually when he says this thing's going to be ready by that date, it usually doesn't happen.
It isn't.
That's where there's a lack of confidence.
All right. With regard to the two very different paces and tones of these campaigns, we see the president, the rallies, we see Vice President Joe Biden, with his mask, mostly in Wilmington, Delaware. He has gone to, I think, 4 or 5 states, over the course of the last couple of weeks. This is from Naomi Lim, political reporter Naomi Lim. She says, while Trump has already notched up 2 multi-state days in the week since Labor Day, Biden's team sent his dedicated bunch of pool reporters home 3 times before 10:30 in the morning because it hadn't planned any public events for the 2-term vice president. Do the American people sort of need to see that the former vice president can handle the very tough, demanding schedule of what it takes to be the president of the United States?
Well, the best way to see who can handle that demanding schedule is to see who can handle it on the campaign trail. Look, I'm in my 30s, and the presidential campaign trail when I was a candidate, I got to tell you, it beat me up too. It is tough, but I was competing with Joe Biden, and Joe Biden beat me and every other contender that was there. So I don't think there's a lot of question about his ability to do that. Now, I'm not surprised.
You didn't put a lid on. I followed you around New Hampshire and a couple other states, and you didn't have a lid on at 10:30 in the morning.
Well, look, I'm not surprised President Trump is frantically trying to get out of the hole that he's in. And he knows he's behind. He's going to do everything he can to try to make up that advantage. But look, we've seen the Vice President Biden campaigning across the country. There's one key difference, which is he's never going to stuff his supporters into a room without masks in an indoor space over the objections of local public health officials. When you do that, you show a level of fundamental disrespect for your own supporters. Think about how low an opinion the Trump campaign must have of Trump supporters, even back to Tulsa, where they made people go into the event, sign a waiver.
Who made someone go in there? Who made someone? Those people went in of their own accord. They were not made to go in there. You can criticize allowing it or hosting it, but to say that they were made to go in there and they were stuffed in there, I don't think is accurate. If you can find me some people who say that that's what happened, I'd be more than happy to hear from them.
The point is that there's respect for the health and safety of the people attending the event. You set a certain tone when you lead people to a certain place. And if you lead people to danger, you bear some responsibility for that. In Tulsa and more recently Nevada, he led people into danger. And you know how he can tell? You can tell what a dim view he has of the intelligence of his own supporters. was something they were made to do, was sign a waiver saying they wouldn't sue him if they got sick and died. Think about what that says for the respect that he has
but
for the people that he's inviting
I think
into
we're gonna see a point in this country where you do that pretty much everywhere you go. Any concert, any sporting event, all of those things, I think, is probably going to be standard. And I'll just say again,
I'm pretty sure
nobody's forced to go into any of those places.
Biden.
Just like you're not going to be forced to go to a football game or a basketball game. It's going to be something that you do of your own volition. But people make choices, and we'll see how it works out. Pete Buttigieg, thank you. It's good to have you with us tonight, and I appreciate you coming on. Thank you, sir.